Welcome! This is a short tutorial to help you get started with creating graphical apps in Python. For this particular video, we will be creating a simple dice rolling app. If I click Run here, you'll see that a window pops up and I have different dice here. I've made mine to help with Dungeons and Dragons, so it's a D&D dice roller, but you could create yours to help with any other board game that you wish. And the basic idea is if I wanted a six-sided dice or die, I could click on there and the number 2 would fly on from the side. And every time I click that, it will give me a number between 1 and 6. If I wanted a 10-sided die, I could click on the D10 here, or a 4-sided die. And if I click clear, it just clears the screen until my next click. For this project, we will be using a free online tool called CodeSculptor 3. This is a simple web-based Python coding environment that's ideal for learning the basics of GUI programming. So let's have a look at this boilerplate code first, just so that we can understand how GUI programming can be a little bit different to command line Python programming. I'm going to just get rid of these comments here because we don't need them. And I'm going to go through each line of code and just explain what it does. So import simple GUI goes and gets the library or the extra hidden code that will create this window for us later on. You might have imported things in Python before, like random, for example. So obviously a graphical user interface module is not something that comes with Python. It would be an extra. And this is just a very simple, as the name implies, graphical user interface library that we will be using. Then we just create a variable called message and save the string welcome in it. Just remember that doesn't display it on the screen or anything yet. It's just saved in that variable. Now, what we're going to do now is create two functions, click and draw, and the click function here is going to run whenever this button is clicked, and the draw function is going to run whenever the screen is ready to refresh, probably 60 times a second. Now in the click function, it just changes message to good job. It goes and gets the global message and then changes it to good job. And in the draw function, it has some code which will draw the text on the screen 60 times a second, wiping everything off before and painting over it with the new code. Now, this click and draw functions won't run on the click and the draw automatically. We need to actually tell the graphics library when to run them. So the first thing we do in the program is create a frame, and that is this frame here. It has the name on it and the width and the height. Then we add a button to the frame called click me. So the text here is what will be written on the button, and this is the name of the function that will run when you click the button, this one here. So if you called your function click button, you would have to write click button there. And then the frame here, we tell it which function we would like to run whenever the screen is ready to redraw, which is draw. Again, you could call it something different. And then the final thing we do is start the frame, and then the program is going. So all of this goes top to bottom in one frame very quickly, like pretty much instantaneously. And then how the program works from that point is that these functions, which we call callbacks, will be called by the program whenever the screen is ready to refresh or whenever there is a click on the button. So this is a little bit different way of thinking about things to a simple command line Python program. And another word for this is event-driven programming. So basically, the code in its entirety runs instantaneously, basically, but then we have these functions left over that will be triggered by certain events, so event-driven programming. I hope that makes sense. Another thing to quickly understand about CodeSculptor is how the saving system works. Basically, whenever you click save, you'll notice that you get a unique URL at the top of the screen. You can't see on my screen here, but you'll see it. And you need to bookmark that by clicking on the little star in the corner of the address bar, and that will bookmark it and you'll be able to go back to it. There's no logging in or signing in. That's simply the way it works. Every time you click save again, the number on the end of that will change from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. So all of your previous versions will be stored or saved there. The final thing to understand about Code Sculptor is if you want to know how to do anything that isn't covered in the tutorial here, you can just click on Docs, and that will, in a lot of detail, explain especially how simple GUI works. Okay, so let's get into making our app. We are going to actually use most of this code, although we might change it a little bit for our needs. So the message, instead of welcome, is going to always be a number between 1 and 6. Let's just set it to 3 for the moment. And, oops. Oh, okay, so this is an interesting thing that's come up already. So if previously it was a string of letters, whereas now we've changed it to a different data type, which is a number. And if you want to draw, the draw text function only takes a string. So what we can do is we can just type str, and that will turn that from a number into a string, and then we run there, and there it is. Maybe instead of message, we might change it to result, the result of the dice roll, and we'll change that here as well. Okay, that still works. And we probably want to draw it a little bit bigger, so instead of 48, maybe we'll try something like 72. That's nice and big. And I mean, I've zoomed in mine a lot, so yes, I'm going to make mine quite big, because on yours the numbers will seem a bit smaller. So 160. The window here, instead of home, calling it home, we can call it D&D Dice, or you can call yours whatever you like. And I think I might make mine 300 by 250. I'm just going to make it, because 300 wide looks good, but I just want to make it a little bit taller. And currently it's 200, so I'll make it 250 and run that. There we go. And we might want to try and make this in the middle somewhere. Now, it's sometimes hard with text because the point at which the text exists isn't necessarily, the dot is not necessarily in the middle. So let's just put in the middle of these numbers and see what happens. So half of 300 wide is 150, and half of 250, actually that's pretty close, would be 125. So this is the position, remember, on the screen. And you'll see actually this point here at the bottom left of the number must be where the number is drawn from, or where the text is drawn from. So I want to move it down, so we'll have to increase the y value, because remember, y starts as 0 at the top and actually increases as we go down. That's sort of a figment of a holdover from old computer monitors in the 70s. So instead of 125 here, let's make it a little bit bigger. Maybe we'll try 200. That's probably a little bit too far, so I'll try 180. That's pretty good. I'm okay. 175. We'll do that. Okay, and then I want it moved left a little bit, so I'm going to have to decrease the x value. We'll try 100. Maybe a little bit increased. 120. Okay, perfect. So I've ended up making the window 300 by 250, and I've drawn the text at 120 and 175 on this canvas draw function here. You don't have to do the exact same thing as me. You could make it different if you wish, up to you. I'm going to hit save up here, and you'll notice that up in your bar, it'll change the number from 0 to a 1 or 1 to a 2. And so if you get back on later with your bookmark and you think you've lost it, don't worry, just increase the number at the top and it should work. Okay, I think we've pretty much set up what we're going to do here. Are there any other changes that I want to this window? I'm just thinking here. Okay, so we have a button here that's called Click Me. And instead of called it Click Me, I'm going to call it D6 for our regular dice. And then over here, we're going to have to get the global result in. And again, I'm not going to do any of the logic yet. Just for testing purposes, I'll just say result equals 4. Obviously, it's a really terrible random dice roller if you click on this and it always changes it to 4, but I just want to make sure that it's working. Okay, so we've gotten to the point here where we have a window now and it says our name of our app in the top left, and our button now says D6 for a 6-sided die, and if I click on it, it always gives us the number 4, which is pointless. And also when we start it, it always tells us the number 3. Now I'm thinking when we start it, we should actually always have it blank. So why don't we, no, for the moment we'll leave it that it says, how about we make it impossible to start? We'll just say result equals 0 at the start, which is obviously not possible, and then when we hit D6 it changes. We can fix it up later a little bit from there. Okay, so instead of calling this function click, because I'm going to need several different buttons here, a D4, a D6, a D whatever. So I am going to call this a function does something, so I'll use a verb. I'll say roll D4. So a 4-sided die. Let's do a 4-sided die first. So roll D4 is what I'm going to call this function. And then I'm going to copy and paste that down here into this button. Oh, sorry, D6. We'll start with the D6. And I'm going to copy and paste this into here. So basically, down here, what this means is add a button to the frame that says D6. And as you can see, that's over here. And when you click that button, we want to run a function called roll D6. So here it is, roll D6. Now, one other little thing I want to do is I want this button to be a bit wider. And in here, if you put a comma and you type 60 for 60 pixels, that will make it 60 pixels wide, and that way all the buttons can be a bit wider and a little bit easier to click. Okay, so here's the main part. How do we here, instead of just say result equals 4, so just a reminder, this function, roll D6, gets run whenever that button is clicked, and we go and get the global variable result, and then we set it to 4. If we didn't say global, by the way, if we just said set result to 4, it would create a new variable inside this function that only exists within this function called a local variable, and we don't want that. We want to go back and use this one, change this one, because this is the one that gets printed out in our draw function. Okay. Now you might say also, why didn't we need global result here? You only need that if you're going to change it, okay? So result equals 4. So we don't want result equal 4. We want a random number between 1 and 6. Well, that's not built into Python's core library. It's an extra library you need to import. So just say import random. A little bit like asking for cheese on a burger. It's an added extra that you can get. So that will now bring in all of the random functionality. And what you're going to do is you're going to change the result to get the random library and press dot to access all of the functions or methods inside that library. And there's one called randint, short for random integer. And an integer just means a whole number. So for example, 1 or 6, but not 2.34, for example. And then you need to say the lowest and the highest possible results that you would like. Okay, so now every time we click that button, it should get a random integer between 1 and 6 and put it into result. Let's just go and check that. And if I hit there 2, 2, 4, 2, 5, 1, 3, I'm just going to keep going until I get a 6 to convince myself, there we go, that everything is possible. Okay, so how would we go about adding a D4, for example? Well, down here we can just copy this, and I'll put it above it just so they're in order, and change the label on this button to D4, and we want a different function run as well, and we'll need to create that different function that runs when that button is pressed. So this one we'll call roll D4. We just made up that name, but hopefully it makes sense. And this one will change it to a random integer of between 1 and 4. So let's try that. So we press D4 should always be numbers between 1 and 4, and D6 should be between 1 and 6. That looks correct. Okay, so what I would like you to do is to go and see if you can implement at least one more. So for example, a D8 or a D10. So you'll need to make another copy of this and change it slightly. So you need to copy this function, and you'll need to copy and paste this and make another button. See if you can do that. I had D4, D6, D8, and D10 for Dungeons and Dragons, but you can do it however different you would like. Okay, so I think we're doing really well. We have our app here that starts with a nice big 0 in the middle, and then whenever you hit D4, it creates a die roll between 1 and 4, and D6 is between 1 and 6. Hopefully you've added another 1 or 2 buttons there, like a D8 or a D10, for example, or D20, whatever you might need. Today I'm going to show you how to create a clear button, and also I think when the app starts I would like it to be blank here as well. Let's start with a clear button. Okay, so I'm going to have to create another button here, and we'll call it clear, and we can make a function. I'll just call my function clear as well, or maybe I'll say clear result. That's what I'll call my function, clear the result, and I want it to be the same width, so 60. And then up here I will create the function that will run whenever that button is clicked. Now we need to get the result from the global space. Oops, result. And we're just going to, I think for the moment, do the same thing that we did on startup and say result equals 0. So now if I go into here and click on one of these and then click clear, it goes back to 0. But rather than displaying it when it's 0, I would like it to actually not show anything at all. And the way that I would do that is we can use an if statement in the draw handler. So remember, this draw handler here has been set up as the default set draw handler, which runs probably about 60 times a second. And in there, we redraw all the time this, we redraw this result here. You can change the color too if you like, by the way. What I might say is I might say if result is bigger than 0, then draw it, otherwise don't draw it. Because remember, every frame the whole screen gets wiped, and so if it doesn't draw it, then there'll be nothing on the screen each frame. So there should be nothing there. Now it's bigger than 0. Now we hit clear, it's 0 again, but it's not being drawn. Interestingly, another way that you can do this, just out of interest, is what we really mean is if it doesn't equal 0. And you'll remember that equals, when you're comparing things, looks like this. So doesn't equals is actually exclamation mark equals. So if result, that's probably a bit closer to the meaning that I'm thinking here, because when we set it to 0 specifically, we don't want it to show up. So if result doesn't equal 0, then draw it. Okay, so see if that works. Yep, that seems to be working well. Okay, so I think we've done pretty well so far. There is one thing that I think I don't like about the app is it's not particularly interesting. If I click a D6 or a D8, I get a number, but it doesn't animate in any way. And another thing that can be problematic is sometimes, for example, with the D4 especially, if I just clicked the button twice, and because I got a 3 two times in a row, there's no visual indication that it's a new 3 rather than the previous 3. So I really would like some animation to happen once I click a button. So my idea is to have it just sliding in from the side. Now the way that I would go about that would be, if we come down here, you can see that it always gets drawn, the result always gets drawn in the same spot, and the first number here is the x value, which is the distance from the edge of the screen here, and the second one is how far down, or the y value. So I only care about the x value in this case. And instead of saying it's going to be 110, I'm going to replace it with a variable. So I'm just going to say xpos for short. I'm just coming up with that name myself because it sort of makes sense, but you can call it something different if you like. And I'm going to create that variable at the start here. And I'm going to set it to 110. And seeing as I'm using the variable in this draw function here, I'll just say global xpos, which is technically not needed if we're just using the variable, but we're actually going to be changing the variable in here as well. So let's see if that works. Yep, it seems to be working fine. But now you can see that what we could actually create a little bit of animation in here. And this draw function runs 60 times a second, so I could say xpos plus equals 1. So every frame we're increasing it by 1 pixel. And now if I run this, you'll see it's flying off to the side. And if I click any of the other buttons, unfortunately, it's still flying off to the other side. So what I probably want to do is actually inside these separate dice rolls here, I want to add the xpos to the list of global variables we can change. And I would like to set xpos to something off the screen. So 0 would be the edge of the screen, but I want it completely off the screen, so I might say minus or negative 50. So if I click the D4 now, it will actually set it off the screen and it will come onto the screen. And if I click D4 again it will be off the screen. I may even do a little bit further left, say negative 100, and I probably want it to come on quicker as well. So I might say, for example, 10 pixels every time. So let's try that. Okay, that's pretty good, but the problem is it doesn't stop at 110. So let's make it always stop at 110. So here in the draw function, I could say if xpos is greater than 110, then xpos equals 110. So that will just, every frame, if it gets increased by too much, it'll just set it back to 110. And you can see now we have this animation effect, which I think looks much better. And if we have the same number twice in a row, which we haven't, there we go, we had 2 3s in a row, you can see that it gives us some indication that it's actually a different 3 that we've just selected. Now you notice the animation does not work with the other buttons here, but you could make that work by adding this to the other ones. So Control C, So we have access within them to changing that global variable, and we can add these in here as well. And now hopefully it should work with all of them. It doesn't matter with clear because it's not going to be displayed anyway. Yep, and that appears to be working just fine. So now it is animated. So have a bit of a play around yourself. You might like to change the colors. You might like to have a background. You might like to have it flying in from different angles or different speeds, different sides. You might like to have some effect for the clear button. You can mess around and add your own things. And of course, don't forget to save and bookmark that final address that you have up the top there. Just a final word that if you would like to do something in simple GUI that you don't know how to do, if you click on the documentation here, it has a very comprehensive list of things that you can add, how to draw images, etc. I will show that in other projects, but if you'd like to have a play around, the docs are very good to look at. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the project and it helped you get started with some Python GUI programming, and I hope to see you in a future video.